Robert Jensen had been a bus driver for over a decade. He was the kind of guy who could be counted on, whether it was for driving kids safely to school or offering a kind word to the passengers who boarded his bus. At 38, Robert had settled into a rhythm that most people might call predictable, but for him, it was a comforting routine. His daily schedule had become second nature, from the early morning wake-up call to the hum of the bus engine as it carried children through their neighborhoods, picking them up one by one. Each stop along the route felt like a familiar scene, kids rushing out of their homes, backpack straps bouncing against their backs, and the occasional parent waving a tired but grateful goodbye. Robert had a way of making everyone feel at ease. He'd greet each child by name, remembering little details about their lives. For him, this wasn't just a job, it was a part of who he was. Robert wasn't married and he didn't have children of his own, but he loved the kids. He felt like a surrogate father figure to many of them, always keeping an eye on the troublemakers while offering a smile and a word of encouragement to those who were quiet and shy. He'd seen the same group of children grow over the years, and in a way they had become his extended family. Their safety was his priority, and nothing else mattered more to him. Outside of his work, Robert had a quiet life. He spent his evenings reading, cooking simple meals, and going for long walks around the city. He wasn't a man who craved excitement. He found peace in the ordinary. Every day he would end his shift, knowing that he had done his part in making the world a little bit safer for the kids in his care. His work was never glamorous, but it was meaningful to him, and that was all that mattered. Yet, as Robert would soon learn, sometimes the most routine days can turn into something far from ordinary. What he thought would be just another regular shift would soon change everything. Ella Parker was just 8 years old, but she carried herself with the quiet determination of someone much older. With big brown eyes and an unassuming smile, she had a way of slipping through the cracks unnoticed. It wasn't that she was shy, but life had made her more independent than most kids her age. Raised in a busy household with 2 younger brothers, Ella often found herself looking after them more than her parents did. Her mother worked 2 jobs to keep the family afloat, and her father was always away on business trips. In the absence of a solid parental presence, Ella became her own anchor. Though her situation at home wasn't ideal, Ella never complained. She knew her family was doing the best they could, and she took pride in the little things she could do to help out. She often made dinner for her brothers, helped them with homework, and even ran errands for her mom. She was the type of child who at a young age understood the importance of responsibility and the weight it could carry. But despite her strength, Ella still yearned for something that she couldn't put into words. Perhaps it was the feeling of security that most kids took for granted, or the attention that she often had to go without. She longed for moments of peace to not have to worry about what her brothers needed next, or when her mom would get home. Sometimes she'd retreat into her imagination, taking long walks through the neighborhood, letting the world slip away as she imagined herself in far-off places. It was on one of those walks that Ella found herself far from home, wandering deeper into the city than she ever had before. She had meant to go to the nearby park, but got sidetracked by something along the way. A curious shop, a tempting smell from a street vendor. She didn't notice how far she had gone, until the building started looking unfamiliar and the streetlights flickered on. When she tried to retrace her steps, panic began to set in. She was lost alone in a city she didn't fully know. Ella had always been cautious, but now in a place unfamiliar and eerily quiet, she realized how vulnerable she truly was. With every step, the world felt a little more distant from the comfort of her home. All she wanted was to find her way back, but fear kept her frozen in place. The night was falling, and the city seemed to grow darker with every passing minute. What she didn't know was that this moment of fear would soon change the course of her life in ways she couldn't yet imagine. And then, at the exact moment, Ella felt her hope slipping away. Something unexpected happened. A bus pulled up, and a stranger reached out to her with kindness. It was a crisp autumn evening when Robert Jensen's bus rolled down the usual route, its headlights cutting through the gathering dusk. Robert had been driving the same route for over a decade, getting to know the regulars and the rhythms of his passengers. Most days his job was routine pickup, drop-off, and repeat. But tonight something was different. As he approached the stop, something caught his eye, a small figure standing alone on the sidewalk, just beyond the reach of the bus's headlights. At first he thought it was a child waiting for a ride, but as he slowed down, Robert's heart skipped a beat. The girl was standing motionless, her arms hugged around her body, as if trying to shield herself from the world. Her hair, a wild mess of chestnut curls, framed her face, and her wide eyes scanned the street with unease. She looked lost, terrified. Even Robert pulled the bus to a halt a little further down the street and put the flashers on. He wasn't supposed to stop for pedestrians unless they were waiting for the bus, but something about the girl's posture told him this wasn't an ordinary situation. He made the decision to break protocol. With a soft sigh, he opened the doors. "Hey there," Robert called out gently, his voice warm and calming, but with an edge of concern. "Are you okay?" The girl flinched slightly as though startled by the sound of a voice. She looked up at him, blinking a few times, as if processing the situation. Then, after a long pause, she spoke in a small, shaky voice. I'm lost." Robert's heart clenched. There was something in her voice that told him she wasn't just physically lost. She was emotionally adrift, too. He quickly scanned the street. There weren't many people around, and the city had a way of feeling even more empty when the lights started to fade. The girl was alone, and the late hour only made the situation more pressing. "Where are your parents?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. Ella's eyes welled with tears as she bit her lip, her tiny frame trembling. "I don't know. I was trying to find my way home, but I don't know where I am." Robert's heart sank. He looked at the girl no older than 8 or 9, and the weight of the moment hit him like a wave. He wasn't sure where she had come from or how long she had been wandering, but there was no way he could leave her alone on the streets like this. She was just a child, and something in Robert's gut told him this wasn't just a random encounter. "Hey, come on, I'll get you to a safe place." Robert said, his voice firm but kind, as he held the bus door open wider. Ella hesitated for a moment, her eyes darting from the bus to the empty street. But then, with a deep breath, she stepped forward. There was no one else to turn to, and for some reason, Robert's calm demeanor made her trust him. She climbed onto the bus, her small body curling into one of the empty seats, and Robert carefully closed the door behind her. He glanced over at her in the rearview mirror, noticing how she clutched her backpack tightly, as though it were a lifeline. He couldn't help but wonder where her family was, what had brought her out here alone. But for now, there was no time for questions. He had to get her somewhere safe. As the bus pulled away from the stop, Robert kept his eyes on the road, but his mind wandered back to Ella. He couldn't shake the feeling that their paths had crossed for a reason. In a world full of busy streets and bustling lives, he had seen her, and now it was his turn to take care of her, at least for tonight. "Don't worry," he said softly, glancing over at her through the mirror. "We'll figure this out." And though he didn't have all the answers, Robert's instinct told him that this wasn't just a lost child. This was the beginning of something far bigger than either of them could yet understand. The next morning, Robert Jensen woke up to the sound of his phone ringing. It was earlier than usual, but the call's urgency kept him from ignoring it. He rubbed his eyes and reached for the phone, half expecting a routine inquiry, or perhaps a question about his schedule. But when he answered, it wasn't the usual bus company manager on the other end. "Mr. Jensen." The voice on the line was firm, professional, a tone Robert immediately recognized as law enforcement. "Yes, this is Robert." He responded, trying to shake the lingering fog of sleep. "Who is this?" "This is Detective Sarah Thompson with the City Police Department. We need to ask you a few questions about an incident involving a missing child last night." Robert's heart dropped into his stomach. He had a sinking feeling that this phone call wasn't about something simple. The girl, the lost child, Ella. His thoughts immediately raced back to the night before, when he had found her standing alone in the cold, lost and afraid. "Missing child!" Robert repeated, his voice shaky now. "What happened to her?" "Is she okay?" "She's fine now, but we need your help." "Mr. Jensen," Detective Thompson said, "can you come down to the station? We have some questions regarding your involvement." The line went silent for a moment as Robert processed the request. He had done everything he could to help the girl, but the thought of being pulled into something bigger, something more serious than he had expected, made his stomach churn. Was he in trouble for helping her? Could he have done something wrong just by being kind? "I'll be there as soon as I can," Robert said, trying to steady his voice. He hung up the phone and stood there for a moment, still in his pajamas, unsure of what to do next. His mind was spinning with questions, but he knew one thing for sure: he had to go to the police station. Whatever the situation, he needed to clear his name and make sure that little girl was truly safe. When Robert arrived at the station, he was greeted by Detective Thompson, a tall woman with an air of authority that was hard to ignore. She led him to a small interrogation room where a table sat between them, cold and sterile. "Mr. Jensen, thank you for coming in," Detective Thompson said, sitting across from him. "I need to ask you about the events from last night, specifically about the young girl. Ella, you helped. Can you walk me through exactly what happened?" Robert recounted the events as best as he could, explaining how he had found Ella standing alone on the sidewalk and how he had taken her onto the bus to ensure she was safe. He told the detective about their brief conversation about how lost and scared she had seemed and how he had driven her to the bus depot where he called the authorities to report her location. But as he spoke, he couldn't help but notice the way Detective Thompson was taking notes, her eyes narrowing as if searching for something deeper. "Did you ask her where she was going, Mr. Jensen?" she inquired. "Yes," Robert replied, his brow furrowing in confusion. "She said she didn't know where she was. She didn't have an address or anything, just that she was lost." The detective paused, studying him. "And you didn't think to ask why she was out there alone so late at night?" Robert blinked, taken aback. "She was just a kid. She looked scared, and I did what I thought was right. I didn't want to leave her out there alone." The silence in the room felt heavier now, and Robert began to feel a tightness in his chest. The detective's questions were getting sharper, more pointed, and he couldn't figure out why. He was only trying to help a child in need. Why was it being turned into something else? "Mr. Jensen." Detective Thompson began, her voice suddenly more serious. "We found out that the girl you helped, Ella, has been missing for several days. Her family has been searching for her, and it turns out she wasn't lost in the way you think." The words hit Robert like a punch to the gut. Missing for days. What had he gotten himself into? "Are you saying I did something wrong?" Robert asked, his voice shaking now. Detective Thompson leaned forward, her gaze piercing. "We're just trying to piece together the situation. Mr. Jensen, there's a lot more to this than what you know. We'll need to talk to you more about what happened. For now, please don't leave town." As Robert left the police station, he was no closer to understanding the full picture. He had tried to help a lost child, but now he was caught in something much darker, something that felt out of his control. He couldn't shake the feeling that his good deed had somehow spiraled into a much bigger mess, and all he wanted was to make sure Ella was truly okay. But now more than ever, Robert realized that nothing was as simple as it seemed. The following days brought a new wave of tension for Robert Jensen. The call from the police station hadn't been a one-time occurrence. Every day new developments unfolded, each one more complicated than the last. Robert could feel the pressure mounting, his name lingering in the news as local reporters began picking up on the mysterious case of the missing girl and the bus driver who had found her. It wasn't long before the media painted him as a potential suspect, though they never quite came out and said it. Detective Sarah Thompson had made it clear that Robert wasn't officially a suspect, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something more was going on. His every move was being scrutinized. Journalists camped outside his apartment, eager to get a statement, while others took to social media, speculating on his involvement. The entire situation felt like an investigation gone sideways, and Robert had no idea how to navigate it. Each day the police seemed to find new twists. They had interviewed Ella's parents, desperate, frantic, and had uncovered information that seemed to suggest Ella wasn't a normal runaway. The missing girl had apparently been living with a family who had adopted her under strange circumstances. Robert didn't know the details, but it was clear that there was a much darker story unfolding. According to the authorities, Ella wasn't just a lost child. She had been involved in something much more sinister. The detective's approach became more and more focused on Robert. One evening, a few days after the initial questioning, Detective Thompson called him in for another round of interviews. She wasn't playing around anymore. "Mr. Jensen, we've been reviewing footage from your bus route." She began, her tone colder than before. "We've seen that you picked up Ella at the bus stop, but there's something strange about the timeline." Robert felt his stomach twist. "Strange? What do you mean?" "There's a gap in your bus's GPS data." She continued, looking at the files on her desk. "You're telling us that you picked up Ella at around 9:15 p.m., but according to our records, you were parked on a side street for nearly 15 minutes before that. You never mentioned that to us in your original statement." Robert tried to recall the events. He had been in a rush to finish his shift, but he knew he hadn't stopped anywhere unusual. He hadn't seen anything out of the ordinary. "I don't know what you're talking about," Robert said, his voice faltering. "I didn't stop anywhere. I was just doing my route." Detective Thompson stared him down, then nodded slowly. "We're not accusing you, Mr. Jensen, but you have to understand that the timeline is off. If you're truly innocent in this, you need to be completely transparent with us. There are other things we're looking into, and we just need answers." Robert felt a knot form in his chest. He was beginning to feel like a suspect, even if no one was directly saying it. His every movement, every decision was being questioned, but all he had done was help a frightened child. The more he tried to recall the events of that night, the more his mind became clouded with confusion. Ella's disappearance wasn't just a random act, Robert was beginning to understand. There was something much deeper at play. Was he somehow part of it, or was he just an unwitting bystander in a much larger, more complicated situation? He couldn't tell, but he knew that with each passing hour, he was only sinking deeper into the mystery. As the investigation continued, Detective Thompson began showing Robert more unsettling details. Ella's real name wasn't even Ella. She had been using a false identity for years. The family she had been living with was connected to a string of crimes that no one had suspected until now. And despite everything, Ella had been running away from more than just an unstable home life. She had been hiding from people who would go to any length to silence her. The more Robert learned, the more questions he had. How had this young girl become tangled in such a dark web? And where did he fit into all of it? The only thing he knew for sure was that he had tried to help her, but now he couldn't escape the growing feeling that his actions were being twisted into something much worse. The investigation was spiraling, and Robert was powerless to stop it. Detective Thompson's questions were growing sharper, the implications heavier. Was Robert simply a good Samaritan caught in a storm of lies? Or was there something more to this mysterious encounter? With the investigation unfolding around him, he had no choice but to wait for the truth to surface, even if it meant discovering something he wasn't prepared for. Robert Jensen's life had been thrown into turmoil. Every day it seemed the investigation became more complicated, and his role in it became murkier. The constant pressure of being under suspicion was taking its toll. Robert had always considered himself an honest, hard-working man, someone who followed the rules. He had never expected that a simple act of kindness helping a lost child would result in being dragged into a criminal investigation. The pressure mounted as he continued to cooperate with the police. Detective Sarah Thompson, though polite, was relentless. Every time Robert thought he had cleared something up, she would return with more questions. His every word felt scrutinized, and even the smallest details of that night seemed to be under a magnifying glass. Robert couldn't shake the feeling that no matter what he said, it wouldn't be enough to clear his name. He had been asked to provide his cell phone records to account for every minute of his movements on the night he found Ella. He complied, knowing that he had nothing to hide, but the request didn't stop there. The police even visited his bus depot to speak with his coworkers, asking if anyone had seen anything strange in the days leading up to the incident. Robert's colleagues were sympathetic, but worried for him, unsure if their testimonies could help clear up the mess. As days passed, Robert found himself growing more and more frustrated. He couldn't understand why his simple caring act was being twisted into something sinister. He had only wanted to help a scared, lost child. The media didn't help either. Every news outlet seemed to have a different theory about his involvement, and the longer the investigation went on, the more sensationalized the story became. Was he just a well-meaning bus driver caught in a bad situation, or was he hiding something? At night, Robert would lie awake, replaying every moment from that night. The moment Ella had boarded his bus, her wide eyes filled with fear to the way she had clung to him for reassurance. Nothing about their interaction seemed out of place. She had been lost, confused, and scared. He had done what anyone in his shoes would have done. He had helped her. But the more he thought about it, the more the details started to unravel in his mind. He remembered that strange look Ella had given him as she climbed aboard. Had she known something he didn't? Robert couldn't help but wonder if there was more to her story, something she hadn't told him. The deeper he dug into the events of that night, the more he realized that Ella's story might not have been as simple as it appeared. And with every passing moment, the suspicion surrounding him grew. His friends and family tried to offer support, but even they were beginning to doubt. The constant police questioning the media circus, it was wearing him down. He started to feel like a criminal, even though he knew in his heart that he had done nothing wrong. His reputation was being chipped away at, and there seemed to be no way to stop it. Robert tried to take solace in the fact that he had done what was right. But in the back of his mind, a nagging thought kept creeping in. What if he had missed something? What if by helping Ella, he had inadvertently put himself in the middle of something far darker than he could ever have imagined? In the midst of all this, Robert's phone rang late one night. It was Detective Thompson again. This time her voice was different. There was something in her tone that made Robert's heart race. "We've found something," she said, her words laced with tension, something that might change everything. For a moment, Robert didn't know whether to feel relieved or afraid. What was it now? Another lead. More questions. He had no idea what to expect, but he knew one thing for sure. Clearing his name would not be as simple as he had hoped. The next morning, Robert was called back to the station, not for more questioning, but for what Detective Thompson called a crucial development. He walked in weary, but hopeful, not knowing what to expect. This time, he was led not to an interrogation room, but a small conference space. Inside sat a woman in her early 30s, her face drawn and pale, her hands nervously wringing a tissue. When she looked up and met Robert's eyes, there was a flicker of recognition and deep remorse. "This is Amanda Kelly," Detective Thompson said. "She's Ella's mother." Robert's breath caught in his chest. Amanda immediately stood, her voice trembling. "Mr. Jensen, I'm so sorry for everything you've been put through. You don't know me, but you've done more for my daughter than I ever could. And you got blamed for it." Robert, stunned and silent, listened as Amanda told her story. She had been living in a nearby city struggling with addiction and an abusive partner. Ella had been living with her until just a few weeks ago, when Amanda made the heartbreaking choice to send her daughter to stay with a distant cousin in Springdale, a last-ditch effort to protect her. But things hadn't gone as planned. The cousin, later identified as someone with a criminal history, had disappeared the same night Ella went missing. It wasn't until Amanda finally escaped her situation and called the police that she found out Ella had been found by a bus driver. Until then, she hadn't even known where her daughter was. "I had no idea she'd run off. I thought she was safe. I've made a lot of mistakes, but letting my little girl get caught in all this, that's the worst of them." Detective Thompson stepped in. The real breakthrough came from security footage near the bus stop. It captured the moment Ella got away. She wasn't being kidnapped or chased by anyone. She was running from a home where she didn't feel safe. "When she boarded your bus, Robert, you weren't part of a crime. You were her safe place." Robert sat back in his chair, a mix of emotions flooding him: relief, disbelief, and anger that it had taken so long to get here. "So, I'm not a suspect anymore. Not only are you cleared," Thompson said, her tone softening, "but Ella told us something important. She said you were the first adult who made her feel like someone actually cared." Amanda nodded through tears. "She keeps talking about the man on the bus who gave her his coat and promised she'd be okay. That was you. You gave her that moment of peace when everything else around her was falling apart." The room went quiet. Robert looked down at his hands, the same ones that had shaken holding a mug of coffee just days ago, terrified his life was being torn apart. Now, those hands had helped save a child. Amanda placed a small photo on the table. It was Ella smiling, holding a drawing. On the back in crayon were the words, "Thank you, Mr. Bus Driver. You're my hero." Robert swallowed hard. For the first time in days, his chest didn't feel heavy. He had been dragged through suspicion interrogations and fear, all for doing the right thing. But now, as the truth came into the light, so did a deeper understanding. Sometimes in a world full of broken systems and lost children, a stranger's kindness really can change everything. And in that moment, Robert Jensen knew he wouldn't change a single thing. A week after the truth had come to light, Robert Jensen was back behind the wheel of his bus, his usual route winding through the neighborhoods of Springdale. Life was slowly returning to normal. Passengers boarded with polite nods, and no more suspicious glances followed him. But there was still a quiet weight in his chest, a residual ache from the days when his name had been dragged through the mud. He didn't expect anything more. He was just glad it was over. That's when he saw her standing at the corner near Elm and 5th, holding a small bouquet of sunflowers, almost too big for her arms. Ella, she was wearing a clean pink hoodie, and her smile lit up the early morning gray as she waved frantically at the bus. Robert pulled up and opened the door. "Hey there, sunshine." "Hi, Mr. Jensen," she chirped, hopping aboard. "My mom said I could come say thank you today." Before he could respond, Amanda stepped up behind her, looking healthier, more grounded. Her eyes met Robert's with something unspoken, the kind of gratitude that ran deeper than words. "We're starting over," she said simply, "and we couldn't have done it without you." Ella reached into her backpack and pulled out an envelope clumsily sealed with a bright red sticker, heart. "This is for you," she said shyly, handing it over. "I drew something." Robert smiled and opened it. Inside was a crayon drawing of the two of them sitting on the bus. Above it were 5 words all in block letters. "You made me feel safe." His throat tightened, but Amanda wasn't done. She stepped forward again and handed him another envelope. This one crisp official looking, with the letterhead of a local attorney's office. A few people heard what happened. Ella's story got around online through a few local reporters, and one family who wished to stay anonymous was so moved that they set up a small fund in your name. It's not a fortune, but it's something. Robert opened the envelope slowly. Inside was a check, $25,000. His hands trembled. He looked up stunned. I can't accept this." Amanda gently placed a hand on his arm. "You already did the hard part. You showed up when no one else did. This is just the world catching up." The bus was silent except for the hum of the engine. Robert stared at the check, then back at the little girl, smiling at him like he was some kind of superhero. He had never wanted recognition. He didn't do it for a reward. But standing there holding that drawing and that check, Robert felt something he hadn't in a long time. Not just relief, but pride, real earned pride. Sometimes the smallest acts echo the loudest. And sometimes when you do good without expecting anything in return, the universe finds a way to say thank you. In the weeks that followed, Robert Jensen's life quietly returned to its familiar rhythm. Early mornings, the rumble of the bus engine, the chatter of students and commuters climbing aboard. But something inside him had shifted. He was no longer just the man who drove the number 42 line. To many, he had become a quiet symbol of what it means to do the right thing, even when it's hard, even when it costs you. The incident with Ella had started with a simple act of kindness. He didn't think twice when he saw a little girl lost and afraid. He didn't do it for attention or reward. He did it because it was right. But that small moment spiraled into a whirlwind that nearly destroyed his life. False accusations, public suspicion, and sleepless nights spent wondering if everything he'd built would be taken from him. Yet in the end, it wasn't just his name that was cleared, it was his spirit that was renewed. Through Ella's innocence, Amanda's courage, and the unexpected support of strangers, Robert discovered that the truth has a way of rising, and that even in the darkest moments, light can find a way in. He never asked to be a hero, but sometimes the people who never ask are the ones who deserve it most. And as his bus rolled through the streets of Springdale, passing familiar corners and waving children, Robert Jensen sat a little straighter in his seat, not because of what others thought of him, but because of what he now believed about himself, that doing good, no matter how small, always matters, and that maybe one act of kindness really can change the world.